It's pretty common for DMs to overlook how important transitions are. Are your narratives feeling more like a fog than a clear path? Just everything slowly trailing off into utter silence? Today we're going to explore the power of transitions and transform those transitions from a boring moment to a tool that can help your players to stay engaged all the way from here to there. Transitions are essentially all of DMing narration. We are constantly in a state of transition when we're speaking as the Dungeon Master. Whether it's as simple as transitioning from one player's turn to another, or from one person's dice roll to the success or failure of that dice roll, everything that comes out of our mouth is a transition of one sort or another. But largely what we're talking about when we actually mention transition specifically is the more traditional moving from one scene to another scene. And the biggest mistake the DMs make, myself included, is that we find it challenging to actually correctly end a transition when it's not a combat one. There can be tons of mistakes along the way, of course, but as we delve into this together, on behalf of community member Jack, who said that he struggled with narration, and particularly in transitions from one encounter to travel and back to another encounter, we're going to explore a lot of those mistakes and focus upon the travel transition. So, how to transition. At its core, transitioning essentially boils down to 3 simple steps. First, we're going to highlight the actions that the players have already taken and the decision that they have made to transition from one scene to another. Then, as we transition the middle, we're going to incorporate any game mechanics that might need to take place, like changing of weather, survival checks to find out where you actually end up, and the expenditure of rations or spells in order to make your way safely and with proper sustenance along your journey. Finally, we're going to end the transition at a point when we are going to invite action by the player with a compelling end question, and with a question that we need the answer to. Essentially, these three steps are intended to overcome the distance between something that the players are going to make real choices about and the next thing that they're going to make real choices about. Every time that we stop our players to ask them a question that we could probably intuit the answer to, and we're doing a disservice to our players. What we're doing is we're stopping them from getting game time on the stuff that matters to them, and instead focusing all of their attention on the minutia, like how do you set up your camp, where do you set up your camp. These things might be interesting and useful to decide once so that we have a standard procedure to be able to put into place, but they're probably going to just bog down your gameplay if you focus on them absolutely every single time. It's important that what we're doing is making the game move forward towards the parts that are fun and that invite player action. Once we've just figured out those quick basics of transitioning, there are a ton of other nuances that we can put in there in order to improve our narration. Obviously, spending time thinking about what the next compelling question is time well spent at the table. Not, of course, that we have a ton of time to think about it, but as we practice and we consciously think about it, we will get better there. Likewise, thinking about how we can highlight the player's last actions and how that action is leading to this next step and this next question is a useful and important thing. But when it comes to the actual narration and actual speaking of the words, there's a couple of things that we can do to highlight and to improve. So one thing we can do is we can try to play on the emotions that we want to be involved in the scene that's upcoming. A lot of the time, there's some really great helps in the Curse of Strahd adventure, actually, on how to set the mood that you're looking for in Barovia when running that campaign. Because we can help by choosing words and situations along the journey that is being made that are going to enable our players to get the feel for the scene that they're coming to next. We want to push our players to feel instead of just see what is going on. That said, we want to make sure that we are not narrating the feelings of our characters, of our players' characters, but rather narrating factual things that they can see around them that we feel might lead them to feel specific ways. It's important that we don't impinge upon character agency, and one of the places where I see DMs really impinge a lot is in the feelings department, where they tell you how you feel instead of perhaps what you feel or see. And that is a really important distinction. We can, during our narration, plant seeds and foreshadow, my favorite word, some of the situations that are coming up in the near future or that may come up. It's a great opportunity to help people to realize what kind of a situation they're walking into as we foreshadow the trap-laden dungeon with a triggered trap right outside before we're asking them for their first active decision in the circumstance that they've gotten to. Using foreshadowing always improves the game as it allows people to predict what might be coming, and considering the circle of information that players actually have, you are very rarely going to go wrong by foreshadowing what's coming, because sometimes they're not paying attention, sometimes they just don't catch it, and most of the time the words coming out of our mouth just don't help people to understand what we're trying to say. So feel free to foreshadow practically as hard as you can imagine yourself foreshadowing anything, and you'll find that your players will still not catch most of what's going on, but will be able to look back and, in hindsight, see where you're coming from, and then the onus is on them, and they feel sort of more involved in the world because they know that there were proper hints and clues as to what was happening available for them, whether or not they caught them. Another step or tip would be to link past actions to future potential actions as a way to maintain narrative tension and narrative flow. By linking the moment of action back here to the potential for action in front, we maintain a little bit of that tension that we had built up in the previous scene. If you're going from combat to travel to combat again, or to potential combat again, as in Jack's question and example, then you're coming off of a pretty large high where the battle was intense and things were fun and exciting, and then we're going through this valley point as the tension bleeds down, and by linking back to the past victory and success and highlighting that in our narration, then we can help to give a little bit of a rise when another group of fractious orcs is spotted on the horizon. Though this is particularly a weakness of mine, another thing that can be important to narration is to keep it succinct, to limit the length of your narration as much as possible so that your transition is swift and smooth and doesn't slow down your gameplay, but rather moves it along at a solid pace. It can be tough to decide what information is important to give to players and what isn't, but generally speaking, the answer is the least amount of information that will get them interested in the things that are around them. telling them every detail of the mural on the wall as you transition from one room to another inside of a dungeon doesn't necessarily do a lot for helping their sense of exploration, as it would instead to say there is a dwarven mural of marvelous quality on the wall, and then waiting for somebody to show interest, and then having further information to be able to give them as they observe it and see that it's actually a battle between a dwarven king crowned in a war helm and fighting with a pick against a massive boulet. All that information could have been given at the transition and technically makes sense to be viewed from the doorway, but until we pique our characters' interest and then reward them for showing that interest, we haven't really captured the player's attention and their sense of exploration. So using less words, describing less but giving the feel and the emotion of the situation is a good way to hopefully let your players show where their interests do actually lie, and then saving a little bit of that information so that you can reveal it to them and give them that hit of discovery. Similarly, you should attempt in your narrations to use sensory language wherever possible, by describing more than just what something looks like, but how the world around you feels, tastes, smells. We activate certain parts of our different players' brains who are all wired differently and engage people in a way that a simple visual description will not do. It's important that we are engaging as many of our players' mental senses as possible so that they can get a solid feel for the situation their character's in, and by doing that, bringing it back full circle, finding a way to feel how their characters would feel. Ultimately, transitions are all about highlighting player choices and narrating the space in between those choices. It is the essential flow of play for the Dungeon Master, and no matter what distance you're trying to cover, whether from sword stroke to sword stroke, from room to room, or from continent to continent, the transition point is that point between where player is able to make a choice and player is able to make a choice, either where they are acting or being acted upon, and then the space in between is where transition lies. Mastering transitions is mastering half of the game. I hope this was helpful, Jack, and I really appreciate the question. If anybody else has any questions that they'd like a professional dungeon master to muse upon, then you should probably subscribe and leave some kind of a message in any comments anywhere, including right here on this video. I reply to absolutely everything. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching.